Who knows what FormLabs is? None of you? Who knows what 3D printing is? Okay, that's a good start. I actually did an interview with Colin, who's texting, way back in the beginning when you guys first launched on Kickstarter. It's been about 2 years?
Yeah, I think you probably interviewed Max.
Max, yeah, that's right. What's changed in the last 2 years? What's new?
So much. So 3 years ago from September, we launched our Kickstarter. It was one of the most successful high-tech Kickstarters in the category. We raised $3 million, sold 1,000 printers, and shipped them all over the world, and then continued to sell more and more. 3 years ago to the day we launched on the Kickstarter, we launched the Form 2. So the Form 2 is better in every way. The build volume is bigger. The process is more reliable. The laser is more powerful. And so one of the big problems in 3D printing is they fail a lot. So it's got a big reliability problem when you get to a desktop size. So now that we had sort of gotten some success and some wins under our belt, the big thing was to make it as reliable as possible so it would be a workhorse. Kind of like Technics turntables for DJs. This is the DJ equivalent for an industrial designer.
Cool. So, as I understand it, FormLabs does something very different from the general landscape of 3D printing. Can you explain the difference between what FormLabs does with the Form 1 and the Form 2, as opposed to like what a MakerBot would do?
Of course. So, MakerBot or an Ultimaker is a machine. It's called an FDM machine. They take a spool of filament, they get it really hot, and they lay it down layer by layer, almost like you're icing a cake. FormLabs works different because what happens is, you have a tank of light-sensitive resin. If I were to keep this tank open, the resin would harden. We have a Blu-ray laser inside, so it's one of the tiniest spot sizes you can come by, and that laser will cure the resin. So because the laser cures the resin, you get really fine, detailed prints that you can't get on any other machine. And because the build volume is bigger, you can print big, solid prints. So normally to get prints like this, you have to pay $50,000 to $100,000 for an industrial machine. And this is where the real disruption is happening, because you can now get that for a price that's about the size of a laptop, and every designer can use it. Right now, if you have an industrial machine, it sits in a prototyping shop, and it takes time for people to wait in line to get that machine. But now, just like when you got high-end graphics computers that designers could use and they would become more productive, it's the same thing with 3D printers.
And let's go into a little bit of detail about what you're talking about with you have a new software partnership coming out. What were people doing before when they were trying to get on board, and what's the difference now?
Well, the FormLabs printers always take standard CAD files. But now what we're starting to do, because the platform is becoming more mature, is we're providing integrations with popular graphics packages. So this week at CES, we announced a partnership with Pixelogic. They make a software called ZBrush, which is really popular with character artists like DreamWorks and Industrial Light and Magic. And so this is actually a bust of Benedict Cumberbatch, and they would make it in a program like ZBrush, and now you can print from ZBrush directly to FormLabs. And this is something you'll see more of, because we want the user experience to be easy all the way through. It's harder to actually make the digital model of this than print it. Printing this is very similar to like printing a 2D, like printing a sheet of paper. It's really easy.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about like your key demographic and kind of 3D printing on a larger scale. Like, what is the most common customer of the Form 2 or the Form 1?
The most common customer is an engineer or a product designer, because when they make products, they're going to prototype them and try them for fit and finish. And the reason why it's a big deal is the fidelity allows them to try things they couldn't on other machines. They can prototype parts that screw or fit together exactly like they would before they go into manufacture. And something that is emerging really fast, it's really interesting, is also dentistry and jewelry. Because we have a castable resin, so jewelers are starting to print out rings, and then they can take it into the casting process, so they can do unique pieces. Dentists also the same, because they'll take the digital scan and they can print it out directly on the machine.
But is there an opportunity for 3D printing to go beyond the industrial designer, the startup that's looking to prototype, to the dad who wants to put a new knob on the washing machine?
Sure. I think where we're starting to see a lot of growth that's exciting is, before you had to make the content, right? You had to be the designer, and then you had a lot of providers that are starting to show up that offer content, so you can download digital models and print them. But where it's getting even more interesting is the digital scans that are showing up. And that's why the dentistry stuff is so interesting, because those are high-end scanners that are making files that you can print out. But now as everyone has a phone in their camera, and those cameras getting better and better and starting to do scanning, you're going to start seeing people who can make digital models that don't actually know how to model in like a CAD software. And that's where you start to see a lot of interesting expansion in the market.
And I think that like the enterprise opportunities are obviously there across a number of industries, like you were saying, dentistry, jewelers. But I wonder about like just the consumer who loves to tinker, because at the end of the day, no offense, but this is great as a prototype, but this is like a shitty little piece of plastic at the end of the day, right? Like, do you really, do I want a 3D
come
printed?
on. That's harsh.
No, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying, how much does this device cost?
Costs $3,500.
So that's an expensive toy that is going to print out a bunch of pieces of plastic.
Oh, no. It's definitely not a toy.
It's not a toy for the industrial designer, but what about for me?
Right.
It would be a toy.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to fit it would be a hobby, right? But I think what we saw and what we've seen with the other FDM printers that have gone after the consumer segment is that, just like you're saying, if I give you digital content and you print it out, after a while, the interest fades. So something is going to happen on the content side, not the printer side, because we've tried that a lot, right? And we've seen companies that have been taken down many notches this year because they bet big on the consumer space. And what we know is if it doesn't create something meaningful for you, then it's not important. So your point is like, that's like a cheap piece of plastic to you because you're not using it for anything. But if you're a designer, if you're a jeweler, if you're an engineer, it's important. And where it gets really interesting is you used to have to be Ford or GM or Tesla to afford these 3D printers. But now if you're a small design shop, you can afford this, right? Or if you're an engineer that's contracting, or if you're a jeweler who runs a small shop, you can afford this. And that's where it's really important, because you're putting the technology in the hands of people who couldn't use it before. Because you're doing that, they're making things that didn't exist before. There's a guy in France, last year he printed out an entire 3D movie. He printed out frame by frame this movie and made a short film. It showed in the Cannes Film Festival. That's an interesting thing, because that would have never happened before. So rather than just assuming it always has to go to a consumer, what can people make to make consumers' lives more interesting, like the short film? So this is what helps that happen.
Yeah. I think it sounded like we were arguing, but I think we actually were
we
like
agree.
Straight up
we
on
totally
the same
agree.
page. Yeah, I love that about us. You were mentioning about how content is going to be the key to kind of mainstreaming 3D printing technology. I wonder about price, though. I mean, what will it take to bring the price of a device like this down? What technological advancements will it take?
I mean, I think we've shown that we can design the machine in a way that brings down the price dramatically.
Right, from 20K to 3,500 is a big deal.
Orders of magnitude. So at that point, it really is a product market fit and volume, right? So if you have a broad consumer segment that really wants that and has content that they will use it enough, the price will come down.
Absolutely. If you've been wandering around, you guys are actually in the Sands.
Yeah, we're in the Sands Hall.
That's great. There's a whole 3D printing area over there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, this is my 6th CES. I remember
3-4 years ago there wasn't.
Yeah, there wasn't. It was like MakerBot and you guys, like 3 years ago, right? And now there's like a whole area dedicated to it. There's so many new companies. I'm just wondering, you guys obviously use this whole laser process that differentiates you, but how do you, as the market gets more and more crowded, how do you ensure that you're staying ahead of the curve?
I mean, we have to listen to our users, right? And we have to stay really close to them. So most of the things in this machine, they were actually improvements for reliability. They're not sexy at all, right? The machine had to be more useful. So if it was a more consumer device, or what you're seeing on the floor is, they're putting cameras in here so people can see it on their phones, it's interesting from a sales moment, but it doesn't make it a more powerful tool. And so I think really having a clear point of view about why it exists and why it needs to exist, and being really laser focused on those user needs, that's what helps you sort of stay afloat. I mean, the other thing is also realizing that you're not important unless you're making your users more powerful, unless you're making them like superheroes.
Right. How many units have you guys sold?
Can't tell you.
But
you were so good. You went so smooth into it.
I just try to sneak it right in. It never works. I gotta find a new way.
Well, I will tell you, the last machine,
Form 1,
best-selling desktop SLA machine ever.
Ever.
Best-selling SLA machine ever.
Right.
Yep.
And what's
SLA
the context of that?
SLA Technology's
who
been
is
around.
number 2 and how many did they sell?
That's right. Well, the other ones, they may have made a little bit more money because they cost a little bit more, but it shows you that this is a real thing. It's not a fad, and people are using it in a really meaningful way. We started shipping this in December, and we can't make them fast enough. There's like a
Waiting list?
12 week waiting list.
Where do you guys do manufacturing?
Europe.
Europe. That's interesting. Why not China?
I think you have to be at a certain volume to really, for people in China to take you serious. And what we found is you kind of move through more modest numbers. It's better if you work in places that they don't expect this massive amount of scale, or you won't be they won't take you seriously.
That's interesting. What is it going to take to? You said that this particularly was originally plastic, and then what did they do to it?
So they electroplated it. So that's still the print. And
underneath there.
Yeah, and they just electroplated it. That's a hood ornament, and somebody made it for a car show.
So what is it going to take to be able to print in something other than plastic?
Well, that's interesting you say it, because this tank will hold all sorts of different resins. Now, they're still polymer based, but they have different properties. So this is a tough resin. This is a chain that'll hold about 200 pounds. Actually, it'll hold more than 200 pounds. Probably hold 600 pounds. The castable or the flexible, so they're still polymer based because that's what works with the laser. But what it does is it allows you to have a lot more function in what you print. And the materials, so you ask about what's happening in 3D printing, the materials are where you're going to see the explosion, because now we can make the object. Now we need to bring more function to the object so it can do different things and become more meaningful.
Absolutely. I agree with that. If we could be able to print in like all different kinds of materials, I could jump on board with a $3,500 toy.
That's right.
I know you don't like me calling it that,
No,
but it would be that for me.
That's fair. I mean, I know.
I'm not talking about everyone.
We're not talking about everyone.
I don't want to fight with you
This
anymore.
is about you.
Most things are. What would you say is the greatest challenge for FormLabs as a company?
I mean, I think it's a busy space. The value proposition is clear, but you're only in the market when you need the tool, right? And so much like when you're in the market for a laptop, so your technology's gone out of date, or you get a job, then you're in the market to buy a laptop for a pretty short amount of time, and you need to learn and do education and go through it. And I think for us is that these things will cycle slower, so it takes time for people to come into the moment where they need it, help them learn about it, and then kind of help them get set up with a printer. The biggest thing is just sort of like the march of time.
Absolutely. We have time for about one more question. I wonder, what are a couple of the most intricate things that you've ever seen built on a Form 1 or Form 2?
So there's a jeweler in San Francisco. Her name is Sarah Graham, and what she does is she makes jewelry, but she sells it through a retailer. So if you go into a jewelry store in San Francisco that offers what she makes, they will take your fingerprint scan, and then she will place that on the ring. So she makes a fingerprint ring, so you can get it down to the detail of a fingerprint, and you can give it to a loved one. And that's where it gets really interesting, because that's something that couldn't exist without 3D printing, because you wouldn't make a mold for one single person and go through the whole process. So that's really intricate. Another one is the guy mentioned from France. The website's called chasemefilm.com, but the detail he put into this film that was a stop motion piece is really amazing. There's just a lot of things there's a lot of medical devices. There's a suturing device that people have used, a lot of really small gears. Because of the fidelity and the toughness of the resin, you can make mechanical housings that make really interesting things. There's people making drones and all sorts of stuff. We
do have time for one more. I wonder, given the fact that you guys actually are, even in 3 short years, like a veteran now in the space, what advice would you give to companies who are looking to get into 3D printing? What do they need to be focused on?
I think they need to find their own voice and be unique so you can stand out. So when this came out, it was like nothing else in the market, so you could have a conversation with your consumer. If you walk down those aisles now, there are 5 printers that are knocking this one off. And so that's okay, that's capitalism, and it's fine. But if I were to give somebody advice, I think having a stronger point of view about what you mean and what you want to be in the world. The reason why the founders of the company built this is that there was no way to get this fidelity without paying a lot of money. So there was a space that they could go into. So just copying something isn't going to help us as like a culture move forward. And so I think that's a really important thing.
Find your voice. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank
It's been
you, Jordan.
fun.
Thank you. Have a
I
good
like
CES.
sparring-ish with you.
Did we really spar?
I don't know. It felt a little antagonistic,
Did we
but in
I
like the
didn't mean to.
funnest way. No. I think I was more than you.
But
That's
I
my
think,
personality.
I think
though.
that's how we relate to each other.
Yeah. We're on the same page at the end of the day.
Thanks, Jordan.
That's enough for FormLabs. I don't actually know what's coming next, but you can go ahead and head off. They'll get you your stuff.